Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. For those who don't know, I am on the board of TMAC, and I want to thank our presenters for their time coming to share with us today, and thank all of our attendees for participating as well. Our presenters today are Paul LaRocque with Treasury Strategies. He's a director of Treasury Strategies, a division of Novantas, and co-manages the corporate advisory practice. Paul has more than 30 years of experience in Treasury management and operations. His experience includes policymaking roles in the management of collections, disbursements, and liquidity functions. He also has specific expertise in international treasury, transaction processing, and working capital management. Paul has more than 20 years of corporate treasury experience, having managed treasury activities at ServiceMaster and Aon. And then our second presenter is Bradley Schuler. Some of you may remember him as he used to serve on the board of TMAC. He is now a manager with Treasury Strategies. He has more than 10 years of experience in treasury management and operations. His experience includes policy-making roles in the management of merchant cards, lockbox and collections, disbursements and cash positioning, and forecasting. He also has specific expertise in project management, RFP development, interchange optimization, implementation of payment systems, unclaimed property reporting. Mr. Schuler is a thought leader in the area of operationalizing working capital solutions for corporations. Mr. Schuler takes a solutions-based approach with corporations and non-bank financial institutions to address key challenges they face. He works for clients with needs in cash management, merchant card processing, and treasury technology to increase operational efficiency and internal controls. So with that, welcome everyone, and Brad, Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and we appreciate the Treasury Management Association of Chicago permitting us to do this webinar. We hope it's useful to all of you. We think cash conversion cycle optimization is a subject whose time has come because of the economic impact of the pandemic. So we do a survey each year called State of the Profession. We survey couple hundred treasurers, interview a few dozen of them. We typically start that in December and we wrap it up sometime in February or March. That put us in the interesting position of asking treasurers about their priorities, their concerns, just before the pandemic started. And then we were talking to some of the same treasurers, but frequently other treasurers into February and very early March. And as you know, the world changed during those weeks. And so the idea of working capital management, forecasting, liquidity management became a top priority in every single Treasury department we dealt with. And people began to become very concerned about cash flows and how much they had invested in the working capital accounts associated with inventory, accounts receivable, and accounts payable. And so this session will describe how to develop data-driven collections and disbursement strategy as part of cash conversion cycle optimization at each of your firms. Okay, we can go to the next slide. And so this is a simple agenda. We'll go over the basics of cash conversion cycle. We'll talk about working capital and how it kind of fits in, and then how to optimize transaction processing, both in terms of time and money. And so we can go to the next slide. And these are the results of our December through February interviews and surveys with treasurers. And Bradley, I'll let you describe some of the things we learned.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, as you obviously everyone has been noting, these surveys were taken before the COVID pandemic hit. But even so, you know, cash forecasting has been increasingly important on the radar of Treasury departments everywhere. Last year it went from ranking 2 to ranking 1, but any good forecast is embedded with good working capital management practices. So, that this is basically optimizing your operational AR, your AP, as well as, trying to, save on processing costs. So, and we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so as we were hearing back from the treasurers, the first and most important driver is working capital improvements. This is what is going to move the needle. So if you think about working capital, it's basically a couple of different levers that you can pull. The traditional days sales outstanding and days payable outstanding, containing your processing costs, and implementing new technologies. So we're seeing a lot of very exciting new products, new initiatives out there, with various fintech partners, various banks out there. Obviously, TMSs are a good solution for those companies that it makes sense for. APIs are being developed with more and more use cases across the various Treasury departments. And then, we've worked with a lot of clients this year that, are using artificial intelligence, and certainly RPA is no longer something that's new. It's kind of it's being implemented all the time. And the payment landscape itself is also changing. So when you think about all of the real-time payments, that's basically giving you not just faster payments, but better information, and it helps to close the loop with regards to getting your data collected. And so all of these payment improvements certainly will be helping to increase your increasing your working capital position. So, and more, especially now after COVID, treasuries are being they're at the table with the CFO and with the key leaders to make sure that you're optimizing your cash and trying to making sure that the forecasting is first and foremost. So we'll go a lot into depth about this, but we have an extremely low interest rate environment these days, but even so, there's still a lot of benefits to lowering your cost of capital. So we can move to the next slide.
So as we went from doing online surveys to interviews, you can see the list of priorities on the screen that treasurers were emphasizing. And when you combine optimization of bank services and card operations, both incoming and outgoing card transactions, with working capital optimization, you begin to approach the cash conversion cycle in a holistic manner, where it's not just about credit policies and the speed of collection or slowing down disbursements. It's also about making the processes associated with incoming and outgoing transactions to be as efficient as possible. Once you get that in place, or in parallel with that, then a robust cash forecasting process is needed that predicts how much working capital you'll need in the weeks and months ahead, how much liquidity you'll have. So it's all kind of synergistic. You're trying to minimize the amount of money that you have invested in the working capital accounts. You're trying to make the processing of the transactions as efficient as possible. And you're doing all of that under the general umbrella of improved liquidity management. You can go to slide 9. So our firm advocates taking a holistic approach to cash conversion cycle optimization. So the straight cash conversion cycle formula is days sales outstanding associated with accounts receivable, plus days inventory outstanding, less the days payable outstanding associated with payables. And as we said earlier, we believe the best approach is to also improve transaction processing efficiency, part of that effort. When you get down into the details of actually trying to work with all the moving parts that improve cash conversion cycle optimization, you're almost at the transaction level. So it doesn't add too much more work to make note of the fees that you're paying to process transactions as you map out all these processes in the early stages of a cash conversion cycle optimization project. And that way you get the benefit of improved working capital management and a more efficient process. Bradley, you worked on a recent client project around merchant card processing. It was associated with the overall working capital management idea. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we were engaged, obviously before COVID in February. The client wanted us to kind of figure out ways to reduce their costs. They were realizing that they're processing $900 million worth of credit cards annually, and that was a very high cost center. So we were asked to kind of take a deep dive and review the full cycle of the order to cash processes. We did on-site interviews, and we're trying to find out ways for them to save some money. So we were very happy that we were able to do that. And we were very successful with it. We were found out that that we could help them with interchange optimization, providing more rich level 2 and level 3 data and large ticket items. We found some operational improvements, such as they're automatically updating their expired cards, which is a very, very time-consuming thing. So, and some practical strategies, literally, of how to convert their cards from ACH, not just a shotgun approach, but a more thoughtful approach. So, all things told, we were able to estimate their annual savings of just north of $4 million. So this includes some hard dollars like merchant fees, bank fees, but also some of the soft dollar fees as well. The reduced time and effort it takes to keep your cards updated, or some other time-consuming processes. We were able to save them. So, and just as a footnote, to 1 days of working capital for this company is worth like $2.5 million. So this working capital and cash conversion cycle optimization isn't just a balance sheet effort. It isn't just for making sure that you've got cash balances, but it's also saving money on your income statement. So
right.
I think we can go to the next slide.
And so the way we approach these projects and the way we would encourage you to approach similar projects is to begin by mapping out all the steps in the process. So you can see on the left-hand side a simplified 4 boxes associated with procure to pay or accounts payable. So there's goods ordered, the supplier ships, then they invoice, and then you pay the bill. And so you're looking at all of the moving parts, all of the cost components and time that's spent doing all of those things to try to reduce the resources that are devoted to that process. And so that's the transaction optimization piece. The typical working capital approach is to increase the days payable outstanding. You want the longest credit terms you can get. And then moving over to the right side, that's the order to cash side. And that's tracking the process from the time a customer places an order until the customer pays. And so the big credit issues are topics, not issues, the credit topics are supplier credit on the procure to pay side, and the order to cash side is the customer credit. So you're receiving credit from your vendors, you're extending credit to your customers. You want to watch the average amount of days associated with each of those so you don't turn upside down and unintentionally become a bank. Let me say something about that. For companies that are cash rich, and right now I see this happening on a couple of clients, for companies who are cash rich, who are worried about their supply chain, they're actually paying bills early because they have vital suppliers that are kind of on life support. So they will pay some of their invoices early to their suppliers in order to ease the economic consequences of what they're dealing with right now. We also see customers who are cash rich, who are using their cash balances as a competitive advantage over companies in their industry that they're competing against by extending terms. So they have customers who are having their own cash flow problems. And so those customers appreciate and will increase their business with our clients because they're getting better terms. They're going to sometimes 90-day terms. And the formal cash, so you have to do what's right for your company, right? And what I just said, that's very counterintuitive because the standard approach to working capital management for receivables is to minimize the DSO. And that's still true today. And for companies that are having cash flow problems, they absolutely must minimize that DSO. But for companies that have the good fortune of having large amounts of cash they can deploy to benefit their business, you can see them doing some counterintuitive things. So the formal textbook cash cycle, cash conversion cycle, begins with supplier shipments and with customer pays. We expanded a bit, and we include the whole procurement process when we're looking at these type of projects. We would encourage you to do that. You want to understand what contracting is like, what terms are being enforced by procurement, what, if any, payment vehicles are being mentioned in contracts. So typically a contract will say, you have to pay us in a certain amount of terms. But later on, we're going to talk about building a payments hierarchy so you get paid and are paid in the way that is most efficient to you. And you constantly or consciously drive the organization to encourage that payment behavior on the part of the vendors and the customers. We can go to slide 11.
All right.
And Bradley, you can talk about the core working capital ideas here.
Yeah, sure. As Paul alluded to in the prior slide, when you think about in the center there, the core working capital is, your churn of your cash cycle, your accounts payable, your inventory, and your receivables. You see, that's the core of how cash moves through your organization. But there are obviously there's different drivers that could help you out. And you got to think of it more of a holistic team approach here. So on the left, when you see the various drivers, you've got the supply chain management, right? You have a procurement department, as Paul alluded to, that they're going to be negotiating terms for you, payment terms, and selecting the correct vendors to be that work for your business. Obviously, your ERP or your technology needs to be engaged, and as well as your credit policies, who you decide to do business with, and how what terms you're willing to offer to make sure that you're not, as Paul said, not becoming a bank. You don't want to give it away. So this all ties into the holistic approach. From I would think this would need to be something that your CFO would need to be involved with. Human resources is also a part of this because of there's a training involvement of it. In fact, I'm very happy to say at my prior company, we did what was called a culture of cash. It was a very exciting thing. Those of you who remember at Windy City, there was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, one of the presenters was talking about developing a culture of cash. Like how do you make it real for your team? So I would after the Windy City, I had an opportunity to talk with our CFO at the time, and he's like, "Okay, tell me what you learned." And I was very excited and geeked up about, okay, you can you could basically get more money. You can have a working capital. And you can make sure that we take some steps, concrete concrete steps to help our position. So it was basically engaging with our we had a whole training department that put together a terrific video that was explaining that the sales department, what they could do to make sure that the invoices were correct and that the sales were correct. So again, it's a full court press basically of making sure all the components are working smoothly. So it all goes down to, when you think about the outcome, you're maximizing the cash available for you. You're improving your efficiency. You're making sure that all the departments are managing their processes properly, and you're reducing your risk and improving on your costs. Go to the next slide.
And so when we think about the objectives of working capital management, you want to reduce your sales outstanding, optimize your cash concentration. That's an important second but related subject. Is it's great to be paid quickly. It's even better if you go to your collection accounts, particularly if you have a distributed collection system with different accounts in different parts of the country, alternately at different branches, if you have branch operations, and bring that money into a central place so you can either pay down debt, invest it, or utilize it for AP, payroll, what have you. And a big part of that is trying to minimize the collection float. And that's a game that's been played for decades. If you have checks, you want to use lock boxes or remote deposit scanning. If you have card operations with your customers paying you with cards, you want to move that information very quickly to your merchant card processor. You want to check your merchant card processing contract to see how fast they're settling those cash transactions for you. Large companies typically get next day availability, but we've seen people waiting as long as 2 or 3 days to actually get their card proceeds, and that is effectively adding 1 or 2 days to their DSO. And the benefits around focusing on all that is to improve costs and efficiencies, so you can automate manual processes, can reduce the overall payment costs of both incoming and outgoing transactions. If you have more money coming in, if you can centralize it, you can pay down your debt. You can manage the risk more carefully, particularly around credit risk. So I think everybody is being especially thoughtful in credit departments right now in both B2B and the B2C space, because there's so much financial damage done, particularly in the small company sector, that not just banks, but just credit departments and manufacturing companies, service companies are being very cautious about the terms they're extending and to whom they are extending those payment terms. And I think one of the important things that you can incorporate into your projects is by improving the interrelationship with your customers and your suppliers on billing and collections. Is you can improve customer satisfaction and improve the relationships with the suppliers. One of the most common reasons we get calls from clients to go in and do these projects is billing operations have so many problems that it's actually disrupting their customer relationships. And customers actually will terminate relationships, not because they're unhappy with the product or service or the price they're paying, but that the billings that they're receiving have so many mistakes. Their staff is spending so much time talking to AP departments and AR departments in order to get those problems fixed. And it's not being done down at the clerical level. Senior people are getting involved because there's so much money at stake in large contracts. And eventually they say enough. And once that happens a couple of times, companies call consulting firms. And so that's where we try to help people. We can go to slide 13. And so we came up with a list of things that we see companies doing who are very successful in their projects associated with optimizing cash conversion cycle. And one is to think at a strategic level to align the processes with the overall strategy of the company. They then engage senior management support, and that's important to get because you really can't do a cash conversion cycle optimization project without involving multiple departments. When I say multiple, I mean like 5 or 6 departments will work together on this. Yeah, in most companies, particularly big companies, this doesn't happen. That requires a very careful planning and coordination. It's got to get blessed by the senior management team. And we always see that the successful projects have cross-functional teams. And they have meeting project people working for them. So there's kind of almost like a governance oversight committee that guides the work of the more junior staff members as they work on these projects. One of the first steps is, once you have the organizational structure in place, is to start breaking down working capital management into its various subcomponents. So first, there's an end-to-end analysis of all the costs associated with order to cash. So that's collections, that's accounts receivable. You're asking yourself questions: what does it cost us to send a paper invoice? What does it cost us to send an email or an electronic invoice? And then when the payment comes in, what exactly is the cost of processing a credit card, an ACH? And you're carrying it through all the various steps of the value chain, all the way to the back end, where you're asking yourself, what are the pain points of receivables application? What billing types or billing channels, what payment types are easiest for our AR department to apply to a customer's account? And then we kind of close it off at the very back end in that process review, asking ourselves, how much reconciliation time do each of these payment types, payment channels, is one harder to reconcile than the other? And then we'll mimic that process on the whole procure to pay side, that disbursement or AP side. And there we start, as we said, with the procurement department. And we try to understand how they're contracting, how they're taking bids, exactly what terms are being put into supplier contracts. One of the observations I can make is, if you're trying to convert from paper to electronic payments on the disbursement side, you can ask yourself, what are we actually saying in our contracts about how we're going to pay? And you can, if you want to pay with card, you can actually make that a cost of a requirement of doing business with your firm during the contracting stage. A little bit harder to go back to existing vendors and tell them, well, we used to pay you with a check, now we want to pay you with a card. But in either case, there's a logic and a recognition that when onboarding a new vendor or onboarding a new customer, that's the time to try to appeal to them to pay you or be paid by you using the most efficient methods for your firm. And a lot of times there's not much argument around this, particularly around ACH. I think almost all companies prefer to be paid by ACH now, as long as it includes the billing and invoice information so they can apply the receivable. ACH is sent without supporting documentation, either parallel emails or something embedded in the transaction. Causes a lot of headaches for AR departments. Having done that, so you've got a visual, you saw a simple visual that we did earlier. So we encourage you illustrate the process in Excel or PowerPoint so everybody can understand it. Because again, you're working with many different departments on these projects. And then lay out what the costs are at each step of production. And that empowers you to estimate the benefits of the various subcomponents of an optimization program. So it's nothing that can be done in a couple of months. These are like year-long projects. So the question is, what do we do first? What do we do second? And that should be a data-driven prioritization process. And if you understand the costs and all the different payment streams or process streams, you can rank them in order so you get the biggest bang for the buck. The next thing we see is centralization and standardization of financial transaction processing. So these almost always are centralized AP and payroll departments, and very frequently centralized AR. And there, on the AR side, is where it gets kind of complicated, because we really have to look at our client and ask ourselves, one, how many different businesses are they really in? So it's nice to say, we're going to have centralized AR management. But if you're a company that has not only just different divisions or different business units, but in dramatically different businesses, maybe one is consumer facing, another is business facing, a B2B type company, one provides services, one provides products. The idea of really centralizing and standardizing accounts receivable gets on pretty thin ice there. And so we accept that for legitimate business reasons, AR departments and processes are much more difficult to centralize than AP and payroll departments. So that, one has to be realistic with what you can do. And then we see our clients using their ERP systems to inform daily credit and collection activities, particularly using the AP and AR modules to supplement their cash forecasting process. And then a Treasury department should analyze and measure to advise the operating units on how they can reduce the cash committed to working capital. So it's all part of this almost consultative approach you take within the company to think about credit terms being offered for both sales and purchasing. How are we going to pay each other? Do we want to pay with card? Do we want to pay with ACH? And make decisions like that in a data-driven way and help the business units implement that themselves. Bradley, we can go to the next slide.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, we would need to have proper data. So the most important thing would be to design your KPI, your custom measures of working capital management that makes sense for your business model, right? If you're a manufacturing firm, it would not look the same as if you're a consulting firm. And if their inventory is not part of your equation, then of course you need to focus on those just DPO and DSO. So you just got to understand what it is your line of business is, and look to peer organizations and see what kind of benchmarking would be available. Another thing would be to apply quality and productivity tools to process improvement efforts in finance. And there's either like Six Sigma or some other operational excellence that you can do with regards to invoicing or cash application or your procurement processes, making sure that you minimize mistakes or you harmonize things as much as possible. And again, we can't stress this enough. Leverage change management principles and practices in finance, because this is going to be a whole organizational movement, right? So it's going to be it's like shifting an ocean, or a ship when you're changing course. So you need to have very senior leadership being a champion of this. You also want to identify and resolve data discrepancies on the front end. So you want to avoid invoicing errors, right? I mean, that it's common sense, but you don't want to gum up your metrics with invoices that are on hold, on the AP side because they don't match, or you don't want to have short pays or disputes, for example. So these will absolutely affect negatively your working capital. You want to manage your working capital risk, especially around credit. You don't want to. You want to obviously make sure that those who you are extending credit to, meet your standards, and you do your due diligence, and because you don't want to spend time on the phone dialing for dollars when that's a losing proposition. You want to offer customer service to reduce the receivables application effort. Now, many of our clients are actually using a customer portal, and this is a very interesting use case where that their customers can go ahead and log in and see which invoices that they would like to pay, and so that their customers can go and select and do their own cash application. So, and you minimize any any human capital, minimize the time and effort on your AR team. You also want to develop payments hierarchy, identifying the most efficient payment methods. So, we've obviously ACHs are among the easiest payment vehicles, and there's less touch points, and you don't have to go ahead and print out checks, mail in checks. So again, like as Paul was mentioning, when you identify all of the touch points within the process, the cost for making a payment can add up. So you want to see if there's any steps in the process that you can eliminate or perhaps minimize.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit later in the presentation about items 15 and 16 as the benefits of self-service portals and a payments hierarchy. We'll make this observation about self-service portals is they work best for consumers and for small businesses. Small businesses frequently act a lot like consumers. They'll go on to your website, call up an invoice, provide a card or an ACH transaction to pay that off. Large corporates almost never do that. They may send you an ACH, but they're not going to go into your portal and pay their bill, almost never. So to the extent your customers are either consumers or lots of small businesses, you can really improve the receivables application process in terms of making it efficient by having the customers do it. And that also opens up the possibility that if they're not using a card and they're using an ACH, they can initiate the debit to their account, an ACH debit from your website, which makes it very predictable in terms of forecasting. You can see those transactions happening the day before the cash settles. So there's just so many benefits to thinking in a very detailed and logical way about this topic.
Mm-hmm.
We can go on to slide 15. So one of the first things we do is sizing the opportunity. And so this is actually a summary slide from a project we did as a 2-division company. And it just illustrates for them what each day of DSO does for each of their divisions. And that allows them, they can look at this, they can look at AP. If we're working on the inventory side, which we rarely do, Treasury departments usually don't get involved in the DIO part of working capital. That's usually in operations and materials management teams that work on that. But clearly the AR and the AP is well within the scope of places where Treasury can productively work. This allows them to prioritize whether they even want to do a project, and if so, what is the sequencing of steps? What part of working capital management should we do first? This is an important first step before you start a project. You want to make sure you're making available use of your time. Treasury departments, with almost no exceptions, are very small to the point of being understaffed, and they have to pick and choose their battles very carefully. So you want to make sure that this is going to be worth your time and effort. We'll go ahead to slide 16. And so some of the critical AR improvement levers are to think about the customer relationship at the very start, the onboarding process. And you want to optimize that onboarding process to avoid later downstream processing problems. So this is really the time to make sure, kind of at the contracting stage and the steps that follow during the onboarding stage, to push to be paid, to invoice and to be paid in a way that you want to be paid. And so this is the part where you tell them, we don't want to be paid with credit cards. We only want to be paid with ACHs. And usually your customers will agree to that. There are those with purchasing card initiatives that will be much harder to deal with, but that's the minority. And sometimes the way to migrate, when you think about all of your customers and how they're paying, you want to migrate from maybe 70% check payments to 70 or 80% ACH, is rather than just calling the existing clients, but you just count on the natural cycling or turnover in customers to let the onboarding process do the work for you. And then in terms of process controls, you want to use standardized terms and conditions whenever possible. This is a way of saying that unless your senior management team thinks it's necessary, the sales teams do not get to structure the terms and conditions. So they have some guardrails on their freedom of maneuver on making accommodations to clients. We once did a global project where the Treasury Department and the finance teams at the home office did not have very good visibility at all to how they were being paid. And across Europe, their sales teams were permitting the customers to pay in any currency they chose. As you might guess, that caused a lot of chaos in terms of FX hedging and managing all those different currencies that came in. So what they did is they met them halfway, is they had 2 or 3 currencies that they wanted to be paid in. That is, our client wanted to be paid in those currencies. And to the extent that a salesman felt that wasn't going to work, they had to get approval from a finance manager to do that. And sometimes they did that. Big enough customer wanting to pay in an East European currency, maybe to close a sale, you do that. But it's done consciously with some thought, not just to quickly wrap up a deal. You want to rationalize the incentives associated with early payment to reduce the day sales outstanding. You want to compare that to your cost of capital. And as said earlier, you want to constantly monitor the credit you're extending relative to the credit that is being extended to you, so you don't unintentionally become a bank. If you want to become a bank and use that for a competitive advantage, more power to you. But that shouldn't just happen to you because the procurement department was signing contracts to pay faster than the salespeople were requiring the customers to pay. So if you extend terms out on the receivable side of the company, you have to think about what's going on the payable side of the company, right? And then in terms of credit, you really need to segment by size and credit risk to come up with standards. It's really hard to do a real detailed evaluation in a uniform way on every single customer. So there's usually, they kind of bucket them. The more credit that's being extended, the longer it's being extended, the more detailed analysis they do before making that decision. And that's something, if you have standalone credit departments, my guess is they're probably already doing that. It's a very common practice for credit managers. And when you think about service, you should think about that receivables is an opportunity to improve customer service. I made the comment earlier on that we have been called in as Treasury consultants to work on projects, and the root cause of their problems is high degrees or great frequency of inaccurate invoices that's driving their customers so crazy that a few of them terminate the relationship with the company that's hiring us. And so the whole back-end payments part is frequently as important as, or nearly as important as, the front part of the business. And so you want to put a lot of diagnostics and quality controls into the billing process. You're still going to have billing errors. Everybody has them. But when those happen, you need to do a root cause analysis and look, are there any patterns? Is there something systematically wrong? A lot of times it's a training issue with employees. So for companies that are providing customized services, I'm thinking primarily around construction, the construction industry. They have great difficulty coming up with accurate invoices. Distribution of industrial products, where the terms are negotiated not just on a customer basis, but along different lines of business. So a customer is buying generators, they're buying cable, they're buying pumps. There could be different discounts provided on each of those product groups that all have to be brought together into a unified billing process. There's so many moving parts that it's easy to make mistakes, and then the customers get upset. And when there's disputes, settle them quickly, so they don't drag on. And that in itself, at the back end of the billing process, can accelerate cash flow. Hopefully, working on accurate invoicing will drive down the amount of disputes you have to deal with.
Mm. Yeah, and I think about one other thing that if you could have engaged your sales department to kind of act as an ally to assist with collections, because sometimes they have better relationships with the customers. So I've seen that work as well.
Okay. And then Bradley, do you want to talk about the other side of the balance sheet, the payable side?
Yeah, of course. So the same client that we were engaged with, when we were reviewing the opposite end, was to size how big we could help them with their DPO improvement. So as you can see, on one hand, one division would be upwards of $20 million on one day's worth of extending payables. So all the way up to well over 100 million. So DPO is something a little more in a company's control, obviously, because you can control when you pay to a certain extent within terms. So this client ended up about 4.5. So certainly ended up with a good result for them. I think we're next slide. And again, yeah, on the other side of the coin, yeah, it's the whole procure to pay process does begin with onboarding a new vendor. Who do you decide to do business with? So basically, you want to kind of avoid downstream processing problems through your careful review when you do your due diligence. And I'm sure if your procurement departments have policies to make sure that the contract negotiations include billing terms, payment methods, as well as other service level agreements. You just want to make sure that that everything is as standardized as possible. So you want to use standard terms and conditions for anything that's new, right? As Paul was mentioning on the other end of the coin, you can't really. It's harder to change terms for some companies for some vendors that you've had relationships for a long time, but you can certainly take a stake from this moment forward. So you could make a periodic review of existing terms to identify the best payment terms across business units, suppliers, and product types. So basically, like a utility, you're not going to have much ability to mess around with the payment terms. But for example, different types of industries that are your vendors have different payment behaviors. And again, you want to make sure that they don't exceed your cost of capital, the cost of the payments themselves. And you want to make sure you're paying through the most efficient methods, either a card or an ACH. And periodically, I know that that the procurement departments are very much incentivized to consistently renegotiate or improve terms and conditions with their larger vendors, because obviously they've got leverage and they are a big portion of their vendors' business. So they want to make sure that they periodically renegotiate them and look at them. And another thing is to leverage the trade credit. So you want to segment the supplier credit terms and identify opportunities to leverage trade credit on terms that are don't make sense for you. And there's actually sometimes still early payments for whatever reason. We want to make sure that we stop that. Paying invoices absolutely when they're due, and I'm sure all ERP systems are able to take care of that, and any grace periods that are allowable. you don't want to, of course, anger your vendors by paying them late, but there may be some grace periods allowed. So yeah, let me just quickly move on here. Yeah, to the extent possible, let's use some P cards, and because you can get revenue stream out of it. So let's quickly, I think we're running short on time, so why don't we go to the next slide real quick.
Yeah, and so this illustrates something we call the payment hierarchy. And so we look at the payment and billing channel and the payment vehicle being used. And at a high level, you can see for this client, this is the AR side. You can do something just like this on the AP side. The most expensive way for them to be paid is a paper invoice that is then turned around, mailed back to a lockbox with a card number on it. And for a $100 transaction, it's going to cost them $4.38. The cheapest for them was an electronic invoice that's sent to the customer, and then the customer goes to the vendor or our customer site and initiates an ACH debit. And you can see one of the benefits. If you look at that AR application column, you see there's only a 2-cent application cost of that, whereas others are like 24 cents. It's because the customer is doing that. And so by looking at both billing and payment channels and the payment vehicles being used, we sequentially, using account analysis and interchange tables, map out the costs from front to back of all of the payment costs or transaction costs. So this isn't done sequentially before or after the working capital part. It's integral to it. It's done in parallel. That's a very efficient way to approach these processes. Okay, I think that is all. I hope this was valuable to you. If there's, are we going to take questions now? Are there any questions for us? Okay. You are free to send us an email if you're interested in having our assistance with any cash conversion cycle projects. Here's our propaganda slide. We do all kinds of stuff, everything Treasury. And this is a list of some of the things that we do. So thank you all. I think we're going to have some closing comments from the Treasury Management Association Chicago before we close.
Yeah, are we able to have Patrick Yapel speak? If not, I'll speak in his
Yeah,
stead.
go right ahead.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Patrick.
Hello. Well, thank you all for your time today, and a big thanks to Paul, Brad, and Katie from Treasury Strategies for your time and excellent insight. It's always helpful to have a refresh on the cash conversion cycle and learn a bit more about the best practices in the current Treasury environment. So thank you again on behalf of TMAC for joining us today and providing that insight. Just as a reminder for all members on the line, there are a number of upcoming events, the first of which would be the virtual cocktail party networking opportunity that will be following this Zoom call immediately. And then on September 10th, we've actually just recently set up some time for a TMAC pub trivia event. So for all members, there should be some additional details that will be sent out to you soon if they have not been sent out already. So we're very excited about that. Again, just trying to set up some more opportunities from a social networking standpoint, and this one should be a lot of fun. The Windy City Fieldhouse will be putting on for us, and we definitely look forward to it. And of course, on September 17th, we will be having our first business meeting of the year. So a lot to cover, and definitely looking forward to the new year. But for now, again, just wanted to thank everyone for your time today and for joining the presentation, and invite everyone to join us for the virtual cocktail party networking opportunity that will be immediately following. And to get there, if you exit this Zoom call, and on the email that TMAC sent as a registration reminder this morning, there is a second link to the actual networking event, and we look forward to seeing everyone there. So again, thanks to Treasury Strategies, and thank you to all TMAC for joining us today.
You bet. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.